7. Insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list.
My Lords, I haven't always been an enthusiast for experts dictating policy, historically, but actually I'm very enthusiastic about this particular amendment from the Noble Lord Lansley, because I do think that in a situation, particularly in relation to policy or legislation related to public health, there's an awful lot of evidence swapping that goes on, people citing data and so on and so forth, and then accusations, well, don't trust that data and don't trust that. And I do feel the more that we can have a sense of a genuine independent academic body looking at some of these things that we maybe could all trust a little, or kind of look sceptically at, but actually dig into the evidence, that would be very helpful. And of course, any research, even, you know, I know a lot of my friends, as they say, are academics, can be advocacy research, but nonetheless, it has to be there in the public arena for us to examine it. It's not just sort of data and numbers. And earlier today, the reason why this is important is because earlier today, the noble lady, the minister, rightly said, you know, we're going to follow the evidence. And yet we actually had a serious conversation about whether there should be regulation to ban second-hand vaping fumes affecting people, even though, and then the explanation for the fact there's no evidence of that being harmful is that it's evolving evidence. Evolving evidence being the unknown approach, as far as I can see. And I did want to just quote here, because this is what you do when you're not sure quite how to counter somebody saying this is evidence, is to quote Cancer Research, who said further research is needed to understand the health effects of vaping, which I accept. However, there is currently no good evidence that second-hand vapour is harmful. And yet we managed to have a conversation as though, well, even though there's no evidence, it probably is, or it could be, and so therefore we have to have... And I think that discredits the notion of evidence-based policy. I also think that you can get some different kinds of academic studies as well. I was pleased to hear the idea of the behavioural studies and so on. But I mean, at Queen Mary University, for example, they've done a lot of work on vaping, and they suggest, all their studies, is that vaping is not a gateway to smoking. And I think that the government do need to consider such things. There are a large number, in fact, of qualified specialist academics who are researching not just the health impacts of vaping, but a whole range of the way that vaping is used. So I would really like for somehow that to be acknowledged in the bill, and that group of people is not ignored. Sometimes in this bill, I just wanted, we're right at the end, sometimes in this bill, I've argued in defence of vaping as a smoking cessation tool, because that's how I've used it. But I felt a little bit uncomfortable about the way that it's assumed that unless it's a smoking cessation tool, there's something wrong with it. And I wanted to query, is that true? I mean, has the government got a view of a recreational habit? And why would the government choose to be trying to over-regulate something that's just recreationally a choice? Some people might well start vaping who haven't smoked. It might be that by vaping they won't start smoking, but nonetheless... Oh, sorry.
Thank the noble lady for giving way. I just think that we must not lose sight of the fact here that we are talking about a highly addictive product, and there is a role for the government in ensuring protection against giant multinational companies trying to hook people on highly addictive products that we know do them harm.
First of all, I did want to say that I understand some of the addiction points in relation to young people in particular, but I also think that I asked in an earlier group in committee if this bill was tackling addiction per se as a problem. I mean, there are things that we know that are addictive, nicotine, for example, being one of them. I'm just simply asking the question about what it is we're trying to tackle. And the reason that I'm asking that point is that I think that when we're talking about adult freedoms and choices, it's not just enough to cite medical evidence, but that's why I want the expert panel to really assess the medical evidence, but also behavioural points. That's really where I was going, and I'm just cautioning against seeing only everything through the prism of expertise as medical expertise. Just because it's the last time I'm going to speak in this part, I thought I'd just end on some behavioural insights, because since we last met, the BBC has rewritten its Christmas adaptation of Julia Donaldson's book over its fears that it would encourage children to smoke. That is The Scarecrow's Wedding, which, as those of you will know, features a villain scarecrow called Reginald Rake, who, lighting a cigar, accidentally starts a fire. And there's been something of a kerfuffle. The BBC decided that this was had to be rewritten. And, you know, it kind of sounds like some Daily Mail story, you know, how ridiculous, PC gone mad, all the rest of it. For the purposes of this amendment, rather than just me going on, the interesting thing is that a colleague of mine who works in, you know, media literacy or whatever, made the point that the irony here is that The Scarecrow's Wedding, she argues, is a perfect example of a book for young people that puts people off smoking. Because Betty O'Bartley, who is another scarecrow, by the way, is so horrified at the villain, Reginald Rake, smoking, that she keeps saying to him, smoking is bad for you. And also, the whole point about Reginald Rake is that he is the villain of the story. And so the irony of this is that a media literacy expert makes the point that the BBC's rewriting of this book is actually completely counterproductive in relation to messaging. And so I say that because I do think it's a bit more complicated than just swapping numbers around. And therefore, I think an expert panel looking at the unintended consequences of well-meaning policy wouldn't do any harm as we finish off committee at this stage of the legislation.
Sorry. My Lords, I want to add a brief footnote to the speech made by